Hey everybody, I'm Kostas.
Hi, I'm Lester, and welcome to another episode of What's with RWE, the Canadian Healthcare Podcast. So, as you probably are going to be very familiar with this next guest that we're bringing on, he was a fan favorite. It's one of our highest voted, highest rated shows. Alex Dickinson is back on the podcast with us. Thanks a lot for joining us
Woohoo.
again, Alex.
Thanks for the invite, guys.
Awesome, awesome. Are you actually? I just noticed the background. Are you actually out on sea at sea right now? Are you somewhere in an undisclosed location?
I'm actually in my son's bedroom, which has a giant wall poster of a surfing wharf up in Huntington Beach.
Nice.
Awesome,
Nice.
awesome, awesome. So today we're going to do something slightly different than usual. We're going to do our first ever bold predictions episode, and we'll see how it goes. We're going to make some. We'll kind of review what some of our predictions were for 2025, and then how we did against those predictions, and then we'll actually give our 2026 bold predictions, which is just so this is for entertainment purposes, not investing advice. I've learned that a couple of times.
I can just see the prediction markets out there talking about was Lester's prediction true? What's the probability? You get those little lines on poly markets going. Yeah.
Exactly. We don't want to get in trouble with the SEC or anyone like
No,
that.
no,
But
no, no.
what I'll say is, for those of you who aren't familiar with Alex, Alex is a long time executive in the biotech sector, entrepreneur, innovator. But now he has he's semi-retired, but really, I would say somewhat of almost found a second career. Alex, you're pretty much what do we call it? Like a LinkedIn. You're influencer now. You are an influencer now. I would give you that title.
Unlike the least cool social network, LinkedIn, like the boomers social network. It's so appropriate for a dad. It's perfect.
That's why we're all here.
Exactly. So you know what? Let's go through some of our predictions for 2025, and maybe we start off with Alex, because you have quite a few. Let's be
Yeah, yeah.
honest.
I'll make them
It was
fast. I'll
cool.
make them fast. I did predictions, I guess, in December,
Yeah,
and I had. Go ahead.
so I was gonna say maybe we go through a couple of them
Oh
couple of
yeah,
them first, and then we'll switch over to maybe like Costas give his one, and then you do a couple again, and I can give what was my 2025, and then we do a 2026. How does that sound to everyone?
that sounds good.
Perfect. Yeah.
That sounds
Awesome,
good.
awesome.
I mean, mine fall into three groups, right? I guess they might for all of us, which is, what came true was like mixed and what I got completely wrong. And I think the ones I got right was sort of the rise of MRD and cancer monitoring. That was my number one, I think, for the year. And I think it was pretty well on there. AI drug development, I figured would be a big market, and that's moving. You see that with Illumina just forming a group that really focused on that. Proteomics, we in particular saw Illumina doing M&A around that. In the middle, I thought I had M&A goes nuts, and it didn't. There was decent M&A, particularly at the end of the year, right? We just had Foresight bought by Natera and Abbott bought Exact, but slow in coming. I was bullish on Illumina, and Illumina's kind of had a mixed year. Stocks moved up a bit, but it wasn't a booming year, which I'd kind of predicted for Illumina. And then I was sort of very bullish on Element Biosciences and Ultima and some of those new folks. And they kind of had an even year, but no one got bought, so things were pretty quiet. So that's my self review of where I was over the year.
And maybe for the audience that isn't, proficient in the biotech sector, if we can go through like MRD, I mean, that was your big bold prediction for 2025. I arguably even 2024. You were on this train a long time ago, right? Saying, the organization that shall not be named, like Voldemort, shouldn't like should shouldn't they should have invested in MRD more so than say the other technology they invested in. Like what made you feel so bullish on MRD?
Sure. Well, it's partly it's two motivations, right? One is the engineer's motivation. which I'll try and describe in a rational kind of way, which is, in general, early cancer detection, it's a super hard problem, right? I'm taking a blood sample from someone. I'm trying to find this tiny fingerprint of maybe a cancer that's growing somewhere inside them. And it's very hard to separate out what's normal, what's abnormal, what's pathological, what's not. MRD is a process by which you go, I'm a cancer patient. I've had let's say, a solid tumor removed, and I want to know if it's coming back. Now, right now, traditionally, that's a hard thing to do, right? You do some scanning, how you're feeling. It's a real shot in the dark trying to work out, I've been treated, but is it coming back? And it's nerve wracking, of course, for patients. The great thing about MRD is it's just a blood test. And again, you're looking for cancer, but the great thing is you have the tumor as this giant clue or giant signature, right? It's not like, does Alex have like the little elements of a tumor growing in him that we don't know the profile of? It's like, oh no, Alex had cancer. We got the tumor. We got a real big, unique fingerprint for Alex's tumor. And now we're going to look for that in his blood samples as he goes forward in years looking for recurrence. So it's engineering wise, it's a much easier problem. And then secondly, I think that's the engineering view, right? It's an easier engineering problem, right? It just kind of works much better than trying to detect cancer early. But the other thing is these are patients. Like, yes, all of us healthy people, we'd love to have an early warning around cancer, and that's important in the longer run. But I think the much more critical need is patients who have been treated for cancer, who are under the pressure of trying to work out if that cancer is recurring. To me, that's a much stronger clinical need. So those two things came together. I made the prediction last year. And a little plug, I started a nonprofit website called openonco.org. And it's really driven by this because people would come to me and say, hey, Alex, you're an engineer. You don't know anything about this, but people think I do. And they would ask me questions about it. And I didn't know what was going on in MRD or any of these other advanced, I think the phrase might be advanced molecular diagnostics, AMD, which is a funny acronym. Um, but it's early yet. It's not, none of these, I don't think, are in the guidelines for cancer treatment, but it's such a powerful technology that I think getting the word out and getting people educated is terribly important. That's my plug.
Excellent. Well, of course, we'll include those in the show notes as well so that
Oh,
people are aware of the website and they can actually go and search for it. It's fantastic research. And you vibe coded it, you said. That's kind of surprising. Good on
super
you.
funny. Well, luck. I mean, I lost programmed. I mean, I have a history of programming which finished in the mid '90s, right? So I am as rusty as one could be. But if you looked at that website, and it's not me, I give all the credit to Claude 4.5. And I've been vibe coding for a while, and it usually didn't work for me because I was too ignorant. And then Claude 4.5 came along, and I was like, what the hell? And that whole thing, 10, 12,000 lines of code right now is completely vibe coded. I don't see the code. I don't know the code. I just sit there and talk to Claude all day. I look at the website and I go, Claude, oh my God, I can't believe you did that, you idiot. And I need you to, take a screenshot, and I'll take a screenshot of another website and say, hey, this website does this well. We did it badly here. And I'll feed it to Claude and it'll go, sure. And it refactors everything. And you get a new tool for sorting through cancer tests. Honest to God, I use the US Department of Education's tool for picking colleges as the best way to sort through information. Showed that to Claude and said, we should sort through cancer tests like this. Claude's like, yeah, got it, and it worked. It's crazy, complete change in how programming works. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Wow. Wow. And sorry, go ahead, Kostas. You're muted right now.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no. I was just going to say. I mean, just on the front from a coding perspective, it's remarkable that it's come that far along that you can utilize it. And I think the allegoric sort of transfer of methodologies to new methodologies is extremely powerful. It's completely within their wheelhouse for AI methodologies, but wow, I mean, it's great to hear firsthand how far we've come, because you get a lot of the folks who are like, no, they're still not ready for prime time, you can't use them to do this kind of stuff.
You can.
It's not the case. It's not,
No, and people say, and I think this is accurate, coding is like the perfect use case. It's the early use case because you know straight away whether it worked or not, right? You
yeah.
feed it into the interpreter, you feed it into the system, you run it, and you see if it works, right? That's very different. But it's helped me. We're getting a little off track. I'm sorry, but this is super exciting to me. There's three ways I've used AI on the website, right? AI codes it, right? Alex goes, "Rrr, rrr, rrr," but then part of the problem is these tests, and we have about 65 tests in the system right now. The data from them is incredibly complicated and it's distributed all over the place, right? So, how do you go out, find the data, decide what parameters to measure, sort them, bring them in, update them constantly, go, oh, we need a new data structure for this inside the database. So, AI handles the coding, but it also handles the data collection and ingress of it into the database. And then lastly, we can have a chatbot. And I use the Claude API to go, okay, here's a database. You can go through the database. We have, I think, like the college picking tool, we have pretty good tools for that. But in particular, I think, because my goal here is to build, because I'm interested in access, build a patient facing and physician facing portal into the database. The chatbot is such a perfect way to do that. And so if you go to the website, you can go, okay, I want to dig in, I can go through the picker, but I can also just talk to the chatbot. And the interesting thing there, or the focus there, is to go, well, it's Claude, which is smart and you can have a conversation with, but it's been guardrailed. So the only way it can get cancer test information is out of this carefully curated database, right? It can't go out into the world and go to a vendor website and see the marketing and go, oh, yeah, this is the best website. Sorry, this is the best test because they said it's the best test, right? It can only go into the data set and go through the numbers. And so those three different things are things that didn't exist a year ago, right? It's a really interesting time.
Yeah. I really need to give it another try because I tried doing that with Chat GPT, try to vibe code a bit with it, and it just did not
No,
give me what I wanted. Right.
no.
So I should try it again, at least with that tool, and then maybe if I have to jump over to something like Claude, I'll need to do that. But
Well, it changes all the time, and I think that's the problem. And I was doing the same thing. I was in Chat GPT Pro to make sure I got the best model, and it wasn't doing it. And then just the last couple of weeks, and that's what really got me going. Gemini 3 came out, and I went, "Oh, this is great." But then I went to Claude 4.5. It's not a paid announcement, but it was a whole different thing in terms of it. So it's so interesting that even though we sort of think of them as an equal clump, they're not. But of course, they're all chasing each other. So it's not to say that Claude's going to be the best next week. 5.2 on GPT came down yesterday. I haven't even looked at that yet, right? But you do tend to connect to the one you're using, right? Because they build a history now. Claude knows what I'm doing. So it's going to be not impossible, but a little difficult for me to go um, to the next one. But that's what we all do, and that's why it's important to pay attention. Pay attention because you have to be pretty geeky to be into this, but just the awareness that you might. Here's my favorite phrase about this whole thing: that experience you had, Lester, was the worst that tool will ever be. I loved that, right? It's just a great way to think about it. Yep, it didn't work. Doesn't mean it's not working today, or not meaning that one of them isn't working today. And just because I love Claude 4.5 today and being able to build this site tool database, it's only going to get better. It's a really interesting time to be doing all these things.
I I think I think that if I go back to MRD itself, and I look in Canada, for example, it's the adoption is as usual so far behind. But one of the critical pinch points is the interpretation, right? And
Yeah.
it is still painfully all done manually. I mean, or at least double checked manually, 100% of the time. So if you don't have sufficient number of pathologists, and we all know, at least in Canada, we know how many clinicians we have in each specialty, and there just aren't enough anywhere. The adoption of new techniques like MRD, where you're getting repeated testings requiring repeated interpretations, it's going to clog up the system, and you need better tools to do that. You can rely on potentially one of the big guys to provide some tool at a substantial cost, or you can go out and say, what's the best least expensive way that we can create a reliable tool that allows us to actually implement technology and give us the data that we need to be able to make clinical decisions for patients and to give them peace of mind, right? I mean, which is at the end of the day what MRD really facilitates. So yeah, it's great to have these tools finally.
It is, and you remind me of another thing I've ended up doing, because we're all sensitive to hallucination in the AIs, right? They're not fundamentally good. And as I said, I use it a lot of the time for data collection and looking for logic. And so what I did on the website is I made sure that the database is easily just downloaded, because my whole point here, it's a nonprofit, is make it transparent. You can get the data. And what I do is my I guess my assistant is Claude in putting it together, but I regularly just download the whole database, and I give it to um, Gemini, and I give it to ChatGPT, and I give it to Grok, and I say, check this database. Right? Is it internally consistent? I want you to go out, see all the citations, check the citations. And once it's been through four of them, I feel pretty good about it. And it's super fun because you take the critique that comes from the other three, and I go back to Claude and say, well, they say this, right? And Claude's actually pretty friendly. So like, ooh, that's a good idea. And so there's this weird, I think of it as like this conversation between four AIs. Yes, four AIs. Yes, Claude's writing the code and sorting the database, and that all has to be integrated. But the checkers, and this is just me thinking, they're from four different companies, four different teams, four different training sets. If they all go through, and I just take them through that loop until they're all going, well, I could quibble a little about this and that. I'm like, forget it, right? Because they get down to some ridiculous things because they like to be argumentative. But once the big ones are through, the obvious, not even obvious, the subtle errors, but once you're down to just tiny little opinion issues, then I'm like, okay, we'll just move on at this point. And I haven't read much about that, but I think it's a trivial and powerful method, which is use all of them, use one of them that is working best in the moment to do the coding, do the sorting, do everything else. It's your research assistant, coding assistant, everything else. But you've got three other great assistants that you can use for checking. And I think just an opinion, I think the probability of an error propagating through all four of them is very low.
Yeah. And I think that actually dovetails really well into I think I don't want to steal Costas' thunder because it's his 2026 prediction. So he'll go into that first, but getting us back on track so that this isn't spiral.
Yeah, sorry
Let's
about that.
go over to no, don't. That's awesome. I like these conversations a lot. Just I want to be respectful for your time, Alex, and Costas' time. So Costas, maybe you go through your 2025 prediction and sort of the outcome of that, and I'll do mine as well, and then we'll kind of loop back over to Alex.
Yeah, so I had two, but I'll just go with one right now. So the first one was, we had talked to a lot of folks last year, and I think we had a lot of personal experience with where, how we were going to start reimbursing for new treatments in Canada, right? And the really the big idea was, we need to move to value-based healthcare, right? Where you are paying for what you are actually receiving. And I thought that was going to have a much, much faster uptake than it actually has. My thought was that outcome based agreements were going to end up really becoming the core of how do you track what you are actually receiving so that you can actually track patients, look at their outcomes. Did you receive the value that was being proposed, and that you'd actually have a valid way of checking the contract, so to speak, right? Yeah, boy, was I off on this one. And I think there's a couple of things. I think from a policy standpoint, there's still that pervasive attitude that let's just keep things off until we're really really sure that we've got the best price, and it's still really about price more than anything else. And the second part of it, let's actually create a way to actually look at outcomes depends on data, and that kind of sort of speaks to the second thing that I'll talk about in a while. But really we haven't really moved the needle in Canada on being able to to track data, to analyze data, whether it's in hospital or outpatient settings, the ability to link them, I think, is completely missing still in Canada, and there just doesn't seem to be an impetus to do that. Right. So we've talked about this before in our former lives, and we're still at a standstill now. It could be that we just went through an election this past January. It could be that the changeover in the government really had something to do with it, but at the provincial level, that shouldn't have been really an impediment, and I don't see the needle having moved on either the idea of value based care and value based contracting, or more specifically the conducting or signing of outcomes based agreements. I think for me that was what I thought where we were moving to. I just think we completely missed the boat in 2025, and hopefully we'll start moving in 2026. But in Canada, we're not moving that way yet.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, Costas, is like the way that this could move forward is oddly enough because of our neighbor down south. So everyone, or I mean, not everyone, but I'm sure Costas. I'm not sure if Alex, you're familiar with recently the UK and the US struck an agreement around, I think, the pricing, right, around
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals, and they basically upped the threshold. They got the UK to up their threshold, and as part of that, I think the UK is also changing, potentially reevaluating how they assess quality of life in it as well. So they're going to have that as a slightly different measure than currently what they're using. And maybe you can speak a little bit about that, Costas, because like I almost like they were forced to do something that is similar to what you're talking about. Like it's getting close. It's not there
Yeah.
yet, but it's almost like the Americans forced the UK to do more what you just suggested they do, and we may be like next on the list of countries that need to do that as well, right?
It wasn't in my predictions, but I think I'm gonna just touch on it right now, and I'm gonna make a little bit of a prediction. But so the what you're speaking about is was called the most favored nation pricing policy. That it was an executive order, much like everything else in government in the U.S. these days, and the idea was there are free riders in the rest of the world who are not paying their share for the innovation that is being created in the United States and is being paid for the majority by United States patients, right? So that was the idea. So let's make the rest of the world contribute their fair share. It's similar to the idea of, hey, NATO is predominantly being paid for by the United States. Everybody who's a signatory needs to actually pay their fair share, and we can agree on what that is, but you need to pay it when you agree. So that was the idea extended to pharmaceutical technologies and biotech in general. It sounds like a reasonable concept, right? The challenge is this is how things have worked. The U.S. had the highest price, single price, usually a list price. The only people who paid for that were people on Medicare because they weren't allowed to actually negotiate. Everybody else who was under some sort of an insurance plan that was run by a PBM, they pay the actual real price after all the rebates given back was much lower, right? Similar to what was being paid in Canada and Europe. It's just there's no price transparency. This basically changes that and says it doesn't matter where you're listed. The best price, if it costs $1,000 in the UK, it has to be $1,000 in the United States. It can't be $10,000 here and $1,000 in the UK, right? That's the fundamental question. The UK has said, look, we set our prices based on a certain threshold of cost per quality. That's the cost per quality adjusted life year, right? It's a ratio of what one extra quality adjusted life year buys you, right? It's a year in total health usually. Um, and they haven't changed that in like more than a decade, really. So the idea was let's bump that up. That will allow prices to come up as well, and that we've negotiated that's going to be how this is going to work. But for our citizens, to make them feel comfortable, we're also going to look at the value of that we get for this extra price that we're paying. I think what's going to end up happening, here's my little prediction, is that the consequence is going to be the idea of having price discrimination based on purchase power, which is the way it's always been in the past. If you are in Romania, you just can't afford to pay for the same things or at the same level as you do if you're in the UK or Germany or Canada or the US. Just as one example, that's going to be taken away. No one is going to put the US market and the revenue from the US market at risk. So they are going to have to basically institute, you know, agreement with whoever, whatever market they're in, that the price is the price. There's no more flexibility. And if you want this product on your market, you're going to have to pay for it. At this point in time, confidential agreements are looped into that. So, like, companies are supposed to sign that they are not, even in confidential agreements, making any sort of lower price rebates, let's say, back to countries, or back to the country. So, you know, that if that really holds, then there's no way to protect the U.S. market and the value of the U.S. market without actually taking away that pricing corridors and price discrimination country to country. So my prediction is you're going to see the rest of the world prices in pharma, all the new launches, they're going to be coming higher and higher and closer, if not identical, to the U.S. price. So you're going to a one world price at this point.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex. You're going to say something?
Fascinating area. Man, we're going to use up, I don't know how much time we have. We're
I
going to
know.
use up all the time.
Oh.
It's a great discussion, Kostas. And a couple of things, thinking about it is living in the US, a couple of ways I think about those things. One is, of course, the biggest mystery, if you will, is that US percentage GDP of healthcare is about twice what it is in Canada and the UK, right? So you make a very fair point, I'm sure, around the the prices, the specific prices of these drugs. This is what, it's so hard to measure price in an era of PBMs and everything else. But
Yeah.
from a US, living in the US point of view, it's like, well, something's wrong because we spend twice as much as pretty much anyone else, certainly peer countries, right? So part of it is just dealing with the frustration of wondering why everything, let's put pharmaceuticals aside, right? But everything feels much more expensive here. And then the second part is, in general, US is, I think, the biggest unified market in the world. I mean, even the EU, in particular in healthcare, the EU is fragmented because everybody even still has their own healthcare rules in the EU. And so here's this huge market, and there's very little dispute that it's like, if you want to buy jeans, Levi jeans, it's so competitive here. And this is what I'm used to. There's a bunch of things, usually in the US, you pay kind of the lowest cost to nearly anywhere. And I'm originally Australian, and I would see the difference in a pair of jeans between buying it here and buying it in Australia. It's way cheaper here. So, what's causing the wild inversion, which is the biggest unified market for drugs in the world, has probably the most expensive drugs in the world, even though it's the most competitive. It's very interesting. And so, it's not let's call it, it's not an efficient market. Something wacky is going on. And think of that. So it should be, let's say, the cheapest market, just because it's the biggest and usually regarded as the most efficient market, should be the lowest. It's not. Everyone knows it. Everyone's upset about it. And yet it hasn't shifted yet. So I'm fascinated by it because it says there's some economic disconnect. And a layperson's interpretation of it is the drug companies have worked out, because it's the biggest market, when they get a patent and they have a unique product, they just are going to stick it to the US. They've got a monopoly. They've got a government certified monopoly in the biggest market in the world. So, of course, they're going to put the highest prices there. And everything else is just gravy. So, whenever who's distributing the drug in Canada, which is what, less than a tenth the size of the US market, if that, they're going, oh, that's fun. Like, you guys work out a price, it'll be money on top because I'm focused on the US market. And that's my guess, is what's happening in these companies. They've got a monopoly in the US. They get to charge what they want, definition of a monopoly. Any particular external country, anywhere that they're selling in, is just because, again, it's a zero cost of goods. I made the pill for $1, I sell it for whatever. It's all just additional margin to them. And so they don't focus on it. They're like, well, whatever works over there, I'm focused on how do I extract the maximum amount of value out of the US market? And so maybe you could argue it's kind of the patent. It's the monopoly created around the patents, which we all know and read. The drug companies are probably better than any other sector in the world in making sure those patents last as long as they can be. Oh, I did want to bring this up. But as we know, the patents run out and then they become generic. And I recently discovered, this is not an advertisement, but Mark Cuban's company, which makes generic drugs in the US. So if I buy a generic drug, so I'm on a statin, right? If I normally go to CVS, which is the local pharmacy, and I go there and I can order, my doctor sends them a prescription for 30 pills. And there's some weird thing that happens around insurance. I have insurance, it gets paid for. I pay, I think, let's say $10 for that drug. I don't even know how much it really costs. To me, it's like some deductible insurance didn't cover it. So let's say I pay $10 for, I'm going to make these numbers up, $10 for 30-day supply of Lipitor. If you go to Mark Cuban's thing, first of all, it's not insurance, right? So you don't do insurance. You just say, how much would it cost me to buy Lipitor? And they're like, it's nothing. And then I say, I want 6 months worth. And they go, yeah, sure. You do get a prescription from your doctor. It still has to be prescribed. And then it costs nothing. It's, I don't know, $20 for 6 months supply. It's less than let's call it what is it? The copay that I would pay on the drugs. So I didn't have to deal with insurance. I get a big bottle. I don't have to go every 30 days, which drives me crazy because that's a restriction placed by the insurance companies on CVS. They'll only write it. So to me, it's been mind boggling. Like for anything that's generic in the US, you are crazy if you aren't just ordering it online from Mark Cuban. And it's good for the insurers because I'm not even using insurance. I go, it's so cheap. I would just buy it. It's a very strange market that way.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's kind of interesting, like to kind of even overlay on that front is this idea that the U.S., which by and large, obviously the largest market, lots of pricing power, lots of power in general from that perspective, geopolitical, you can almost anything from power dynamic, you can
Yeah.
put the U.S. very very high up there, right? But now it's almost as if potentially because of this, what's happening in the U.S., these policies within the US actually will affect healthcare pricing across the world.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
very, very interesting that they were able to even like force, okay, maybe not force is not the right word, but the UK had to do this agreement because I'm sure the US had, the administration had something to do with it. But so very, very interesting from that perspective. Now for my 2025 prediction and sort of the outcome of that was, it kind of actually dovetails to what you were talking about, Alex. It was the flip side. So I was wrong about this because of you were right. So I was wrong. In this case, I had thought that 2025 would be the year of blood-based early detection tests or cancer
Ooh,
detection tests.
so interesting.
And the way that the metric that I said it, that I had set as the success, like what would be like I would call it a success, would be in Q4 2025. So we're still technically in Q4, right?
Hmm.
Quarter four.
Hmm.
That the number of tests that Guardant does and Grail does, right, will be more will surpass the amount of MRD tests that Natera does, which is Natera is probably the leader in minimal residual disease testing, right? So of course Q4 isn't over yet, but look at the Q3 numbers. It's not looking good for my prediction. And the Terra numbers about just over 200,000, combining Grail and Guardant. Even though it's making a little bit of a dent, it's 69,000, right? So someone would really need to hit a home run here in Q4 to really make that kind of gap, make up that gap. And I think one of the main reasons why I was wrong around this was like I didn't expect Terra's MRD testing to still grow at such a high percentage, even though it's off of such a large base. They're almost growing like 10% every single, like quarter over quarter, which is not what I would have expected. I had calculated a much smaller growth from here on out, and I did expect a larger growth from the early detection players. So that's partially that was my prediction. I already give myself a fail for it. I know I still got one more quarter to go, but I don't know if we can make that gap up.
Appreciate your honesty and transparency.
All right, so I'm gonna pass it back over to you, Alex, for maybe your 2026 prediction, and sort of yeah, maybe let's go there. 2026 prediction, Alex.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for sending. You sent out a document to us to remind us to do some homework, which I really appreciated because usually I'm not that responsible. So I'm just going to look it up. Um, I think I think just two predictions, but I also you wanted bold predictions, and I'm a little worried that these aren't bold enough. So let me think it through a little bit. Um, I think on the because we've been talking about liquid biopsy and cancer prediction. I think it's clear that that's going to keep on increasing, right? And this is really a whole new industry being born, and for those not geeked out on this stuff, a big thing happened just a couple of weeks ago, which is Abbott, which I think is the world's biggest diagnostics company, huge firm doing all sorts of things, blood tubes and all that. Bought Exact, which is one of these next generation cancer diagnostic companies. So the fact that that Abbott, when bought Exact, says that the mainstream is now buying into this as a huge potential market, not a niche market, not a quirky market. So I think that's going to just on keep on increasing and expanding. Um, from the one of my other favorite markets, which is sequencing market, the big news there through this year is going to be Roche, the giant Swiss pharmaceutical company, which also has about a $20 billion a year diagnostics company, has built its own sequencer. And so there's been a lot of drama around Illumina, which is currently the market dominator, with Roche coming up and what the it looks like the technology is super interesting, and these things play together, right? It's potential that Roche will even undercut Illumina in some areas, and that may in fact even further excite or drive this liquid biopsy cancer testing market. So it's very positive in terms of that flywheel. That more cancer testing of this type, let's call it advanced molecular testing, that increases. The vendors like Illumina and like Roche, up and coming, get more involved in that market. Big news this year was that Natera, which is the leader in these cancer tests, exceeded Illumina in market cap, right? Which means that the people delivering the tests or building the tests exceeding the value of the companies that drive the underlying technology. So that's kind of interesting as well. So I think the big ones for me is the kind of the it's all positive. I really don't see many negative environments. I think the sequencing business is getting more competitive, which is good for everybody with new entrants. And there's also companies, startups, Ultima and Element, entering it. Illumina is being really well run at the moment. It seems to be firing on all cylinders. It could potentially have a really good year. And then cancer testing, I think, as it starts to impinge more in the medical community and the medical guidelines start to include it, it's going to have a huge impact on quality of care for patients.
Got it. And your bold prediction is you think Illumina is gonna do have like a fantastic knock it out of the park type of year. Is that's your take on the year of 2026?
Yeah, I think that too. Because they're not. They sound contradictory, but they're not. I think the market will start expanding again. The problem with the market for sequencing is it's been locked in and stable, and it has an unusual. The prices came down in the last couple of years by 50%, right? And usually, when the price of something comes down by 50%, the market expands a lot. But it only just expanded enough to make up for the price reduction. So Illumina's revenues just stayed flat. So the price came down, more people bought, but it didn't expand. And traditionally, it expanded. You brought the price down, it doubled. Let's say you halved the price. Let's say the market went up by a factor of four, and that hasn't happened. I think they might be getting out of that stage. And Illumina is working really hard also to add informatics into their sequencing story, and and really uh, um, leveraging their market power. I won't go into it in detail here, but I heard the story the other day how they're really putting the screws on people on the informatics side, because they're starting to go, this is actually a classic, right? It actually goes back to the computer era. So you have sequencing, and for a longest time, sequencing, the interface to sequencing, the sequencing data came off and went into the informatics, which is the computer programs that interpreted the sequence, for example, to give a cancer testing report. And for the longest time, there was like this standard interface between the two, which meant that anyone could write the software. But what Illumina is now doing is they've taken their own software and they're making sure that only their own software understands the newest innovations inside the sequencer, right? Which gives them a real edge. And Illumina never did that. I was at Illumina for 7 years. We certainly didn't do that. And this is just rumors, but I did hear it from someone in the industry, let's say a very reliable source, not inside Illumina, but just saying, no, Illumina is now starting to make use of the fact that they have their own sequences. Of course, they dominate that. They have the software, but now the two are kind of getting glued in really close together. And it's a little like the App Store problem at Apple, right? That Apple's apps can be even better, right, than other people's apps because they understand it, right? Everyone uses Apple's camera app because it's tightly coupled with the hardware. And so Illumina has always had that opportunity, but to the best of my knowledge, has never used it. So I think Illumina is working out how to make the best of what it has. It's defensive. It's been on the back foot for a long time, and I think maybe it's working out how to be on the front foot. However, back to the spirit of transparency, which you expressed, Lester, I predicted a boom year for Illumina last year. So here I am doing the same thing again. I don't know. Keep predicting. What is it? Stuck clock is right twice a day. So I'll keep predicting it until it's right.
But I think that's pretty bold to say that you think that the sequencing market will have a boom year in 2026, right? That's actually, yeah, it's I could see it potentially. It's based on the applications. You're saying that there's just a lot more applications that
Yeah.
are useful and people are going to glom onto it, right? I just, I if there is the pricing wars that people are predicting,
Contradicts
then
that
I think
completely. Quite
yeah,
right.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's going to be the challenge here, right? And will the now amount of usefulness? I don't want to say utility because that's a very specific word, right? Usefulness of this type of data will kind of overcome the amount of like pricing pressures that everyone's going to get into. It'll be interesting because maybe there is, right? I think it actually dovetails a little bit into my prediction. But before I do that, let's go over to Kostas. What's your bold prediction for 2026?
All right, so I'm going to step into the therapeutic world again, and if we take a look back for the last couple of years, really the story has been around GLP-1s. They have fundamentally remade the landscape for you know what we think is worth treating and how do we treat it. It started off obviously in diabetes, but has expanded into the treatment of obesity. And you can't look anywhere or talk to any one of your friends without, I mean, honestly, I was standing in line to get my car back for after some repairs. And like the guy in front of me was talking about how he goes out to dinners now and he can't eat anything. He takes the whole thing home because it's just, he's on, I can't remember which one he was on, but he was just talking about how, he's like, it's terrible. I'm eating it for the next 3 days. So you can tell how pervasive the GLP-1s have become in our culture and how accepted they become by the clinical world, right? So um, when you started with Ozempic, one of the things that we knew was potentially problematic was that where you what it did was to reduce your appetite across the board. So when you had weight loss, it didn't just come from fat, right? Which is, I think, ideally, if we're taking a product, that's what we really want to go first is fat, and you don't really have that. So in addition to the fat that's lost as part of the total weight loss, there is also muscle loss. And especially if you think about, okay, well, who's taking these? Who has had the wherewithal to pay for them? They're going to tend to be older, and they're the exact cohort of people you do not wanting to lose muscle mass. We know it's a predictor for your health span, essentially how long you're going to continue to do what you want to do and to be sort of vital. And that's been a concern secondary, of course, to the ability to lose the weight, but it's always been in the background. And my bold prediction is that this is the year where pharma companies sort of make that shift and say, we need a cocktail. Kind of, if we go back to the good old days of whether it was treating, something like HIV, or treating, other disorders where a single mechanism just didn't do enough or didn't make enough sense. We're talking about the creation of a cocktail, and that cocktail not only needs to have something that reduces appetite, something like a GLP-1, but something that actually preserves muscle mass. And so, there's a number of these products that have been around for a very long time. Anti-myostatin agents, are the prime example. And there are products right now coming through the pipeline, and you can see companies are continuing to onto their next generation, second or third generation in some cases, of GLP-1s. The next step, though, is to not only push through what they have in their pipelines. Companies like Regeneron, for example, Eli Lilly, they have these muscle preservation products in their pipelines, but they're going to be going out there and they're going to be buying up the little guys who are creating these for Duchenne's or other muscle wasting disorders, and they're going to be looking to eventually put these together with their second, third generation GLP-1s to create really the ideal cocktail of how do you support an adult who has a metabolic disorder, is obese, and where you need to preserve or increase muscle mass as they start to head from their fourth or fifth decades of life into their sixth and seventh decades of life. So that's my bold prediction, that if you want to invest anywhere, that's where you need to take a look, because you tack one of these onto every GLP patient, that's a big opportunity out there. So that's I'll stop there.
Just reminder, this is for
This
entertainment
is not for
purposes and is not
investment
investing,
purposes.
not for
No.
investing
I,
advice. But
and I
this,
do not have a huge amount of money invested in Regeneron or Eli Lilly or anyone else at this point in time, for that matter. So,
but that's really
Really
interesting in
interesting.
that, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm wondering, is the like what is the process for that cost? Say if there's already a drug out there that helps muscle preservation, is already FDA approved, and you want to cocktail it with, say, one of the current GLP-1s, right? Do you just put it together, and that's like, it's since both things were FDA approved, is it automatically okay to do, or do you have to then go to trials again to do that?
So you know what? I think the first wave is going to be similar to how GLP-1s, how like Ozempic basically was utilized, where it's off-label, right? I mean, nobody likes to hear that, but like, I'm going to break the news to everyone. The first wave are going to be they're going to be indicated for something like Duchenne's, and they're just going to be used off-label by clinicians. So that's what's going to happen. But I can tell you right now, I'm most familiar with Regeneron's data, but they're in phase 2, I think, right now. But they have primate data where they've actually taken two different muscle preservation agents, and they've added them to semaglutide. So they've done sort of semaglutide on its own, um, and then with the other two agents. Um, so you can actually see what the incremental effect to the metabolic profile, or the makeup of the different components of weight for those primates is over the period. So eventually, you are going to see the the hypothesis sort of demonstrated that adding these has this result, and therefore we think that we should have the claim, so the indication for this combination. I think that's where it's going to end up going after off-label use for a few years.
Super interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess, Alex, maybe you check up on, the cost plus one, or cost plus, I forgot, cost plus drugs. That's, I think,
Cost plus
that's
drugs.
or,
That's it. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. You can check out like how much does it cost to buy this off label. It's probably something ridiculously like cheap, actually, if it's just a pill, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you think of someone like Ozempic, I mean, it's going to be the first to go off label, and it works, right? The only downside, like I said, is it just really has no
It's not selective.
it does not, it's not selective. It doesn't
Yeah.
change just what you want to change.
That's a
So if
super
you could
interesting
buy
point.
that for if you buy it for nothing, if you can buy it for $20 a month, and you have to add this now branded product that is not available there, that's not a terrible way to do it. And if you're Eli Lilly and you have the best product in both categories, you can walk out to every clinician and you say, we're the guy. Like, you
Hmm.
need to put our product into every person.
Yeah, I wonder, like, what's the regulations around doing something like, I assume like someone like an Eli Lilly, Regeneron, if it's completely off label, they just can't promote it. But is it just really just the virality of the kind of the social the media, that then everyone's just gonna, there's just a demand pull that they just go out,
Yeah.
people just do it themselves, as opposed to being prescribed by a physician, or even like the big pharma is
Well,
promoting it.
in
It's
the U.S., I'm not sure if there's a parallel in Canada right now, but the direct to consumer thing is very powerful. So Hims and
Yes.
Hers is this company with, I think, 2.4 million like email addresses. I don't know how many subscribers they have, and they focus most recently on the GLPT1s, right? And they have a teledoc. You call
Yeah.
up. You don't have to get your own doctor. You call up and they route you. I don't even know if you need to talk to them. I really don't know if you fill out a form or whatever. But that's been a real interesting short circuit here, right? The US, as you well know, has long been one of the only countries, for some reason, in addition to New Zealand, that can do consumer marketing television ads for drugs. So that's happened, but you still had to go to your doctor and bug your doctor to give you the drug. Now you go to the website, you say, oh, look, they offer this, and they'll have some system for getting a doctor's opinion on you, and the drug comes in the mail. So yeah, the direct to consumer thing is clearly a very, very powerful model.
Yeah, and I hate
Yeah.
to say it, but every bro in the gym is going to be using these agents. Like, let's be honest. Like, there's the market for people who have metabolic disorders, and you really want to treat them because the benefit risk for them. I mean, if you think of how many secondary or long term outcomes are linked to your metabolic status, your weight, your fat content, you know there's a great benefit risk story there for treating those patients,
Yeah.
but it's going to be well beyond that if these bear out what they can actually provide with a good safety profile. And I will give that proviso. I mean, if you've got serious side effects, that will change the equation. But if they don't really have any serious consequences, it will replicate what Ozempic did and create a complete new market, or at least piggyback onto the GLP-1 market for sure.
Yeah.
And actually, my prediction for 2026 actually rides on a lot of what you discussed, Costas, and what you talked about, Alex, as well, on the consumer side of things. My bold prediction for 2026 is this idea of move over precision medicine, and here comes precision health. So the idea of precision medicine is someone's sick, right? That this individual is unique based on, like, say, their DNA, their molecular makeup, and then you treat them specifically with something, a specific treatment or drug that is specific to tailored towards their genetic or their molecular makeup, right? And I believe you're going to have a lot more people that are asymptomatic. So people that are healthy, they don't know that there's a disease, they have a disease or anything like that. So they may have disease, but they wouldn't know about it. Or just people just completely healthy. They're going to take a lot more of these biochemical data, molecular data, maybe even advanced molecular data, and take that into consideration for their health. Like what you're talking about, I would say the gym bros would be kind of an example of that kind of this experimentation. And where I'm super, again, not investing advice, entertainment purposes only, the area I've looked into that's been very, very interesting to me is these continuous glucose monitors. So the idea of a glucose monitor is that if you have diabetes, you have to understand, like, what if you have sugar spikes, right, in your blood. And in the past, you would just do a finger prick or some sort of way to measure your glucose levels to see if you're low or high and so forth, right? Well, now there have been devices for the last couple of years that do that just monitor. You stick it on. There's two large companies that have it. One of which is Alex mentioned already, Abbott. The other one is this company called Dexcom that specifically focuses on continuous glucose monitors, and they have, by and large, a lot of diabetics now use these continuous glucose monitors, because you can imagine you don't have to finger prick yourself anymore. You just wear it, and it gives you real time data, or as real time as possible on your on your phone. Well, last year, actually, yes, 2024 was the first year that some of the both companies actually had consumer FDA approved continuous glucose monitors in late 2024. And so Abbott didn't say how many they've sold so far in 2025, but the folks over at Dexcom said that they have sold about $100 million worth, which kind of it's about $89 per month to have this. And if you just map that as, let's say, assuming someone wears it every single month, so they have to get 12 of these, right? Then it maps out to be roughly about 100,000 people are trying this out. And you can see that from a performance perspective, like people maybe starting out that are biker people that bike. They want to know the perfect amount of food they need to eat in order to like keep a steady sugar, right? You can see how this could expand to more and more people, to potentially first people that are into athletics and performance from that perspective, but then maybe even to the general public. Because what I see more recently is one of the largest podcasts in the world right now is like the Huberman podcast. People are really into this stuff. High Rocks, and which is a kind of an athletic crossover from what's that, CrossFit, right? So CrossFit was the old thing. Now High Rocks is the new thing that everyone wants to do. That people are starting to really get into, like understanding deeply their health instead of just relying on their doctor. They will ask ChatGPT or ask one of the chatbots. They're much more willing to do that. They're willing to go to Hims and Hers, like Alex was suggesting, to purchase their own, directly the drug, potentially even off label. So I guess my bold prediction for 2026 is I think Dexcom and Abbott, or let's say just Dexcom alone, will probably reach a million consumers for this. So 10x their current consumer base. And this is just a consumer product, not their diabetic product. So it's just one that you can just buy over the counter, because I think this is becoming much, much more uh, part of the zeitgeist. And on top of it, with the various chatbots, because one of the past issues, I mean, Alex lived it at Illumina when we really tried to push into consumer genomics. It was like, how do you interpret the data? Like, okay, I got this genome. What the hell do I do with it? But now with the various chatbots, like people are much, much more willing to ask these chatbots about their own health. And they actually did a study very, very recently that was, I forgot where it was published. I got to find that publication. I'll put it in the show notes. That when patients reviewed answers from doctors versus the chatbot, they blinded it, so they don't know which one was which. They preferred the
Hmm.
chatbot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a great prediction, and I was going to do the same thing, which is go, yes, the wonderful synergy between these devices for collecting the data are coming online, and now the tools for interpreting it. I have been
Yeah.
collecting my own blood data, weirdly enough. I mean, not myself, but anyway, having very comprehensive blood tests for 15 years now. So I have this huge data set of my own blood cross section, right? And that's now becoming more popular with companies like Function Health coming up and so on. But the great thing for me is I would always eyeball it and go, oh, look, that's, gone up a little, that's gone down a little. Now you just dump the whole spreadsheet into a chatbot and start to get a really sophisticated statistical analysis about long-term trends and what to think about. And so I think that's very complementary, those two things, both the data generation. But once upon a time, it would have been, you would look at it trivially. You go, oh, look, blood sugar went up a little last week, right? Now you can see it in the context of so many different things. It's super interesting.
So actually, that's very interesting that you've done that. You had the wherewithal to think of this and actually do in the past, right? Did you find anything kind of interesting, novel that you say, hey, you know what? Now that I could put it in the chatbot, actually, it looked across time and wow, I didn't. Has a surprising moment come up for you or not really yet?
Not, I would say, surprising. It hasn't discovered anything shocking. It's been more reassuring because I looked over those numbers a long period of time and nothing particularly alarmed me. So no, I wouldn't say that. I would just go, it's more reassurance that what I thought I was seeing there was correct. Nothing jumps out at this point.
Actually, just to get Costas your take on it. Do you think the government would ever, like, okay, when I say the government, let's say Canadian government, just be
Yeah.
governments around the world. Let's say
Right.
Canadian government in this very case. Do you think the Canadian government would be open to paying, and the provincial governments authorities be willing to pay for? No,
Never.
okay.
No. No. I mean, you think about it this way: they did not pay for test strips for type 1 diabetics. Like, what like that's my case. Like, that's my justification. They will never pay for it. Does it make sense? I think so. I think for the vast majority of people, especially as you start to get into that age, if nowhere else, if you start to get into that age where metabolic disease, starts to creep in, where you know your hemoglobin alpha levels start to change, and you're just seeing things going in the wrong direction, the ability to have a tool that allows you to make better decisions is absolutely, I think, vital in changing the trajectory of where you could end up versus what versus what you have in your hands to be able to manage, right? So it's super powerful as a lifestyle modification tool. Will it ever be supported by governments? No, I think they will always say it's your own. It's in your own hands to manage this yourself. We're not paying for it. No.
But maybe that's a good thing in some ways, right? Maybe that's a good thing that you pay for yourself, you get the value directly, and you
Yeah,
fully control it.
Yeah,
maybe
as
it's
long
like
as they
the
make it available, right? I
maybe,
think that's the thing that is
yeah,
a challenge. Is sometimes they're very paternalistic and they say, well, we're not going to pay for it. We're not going to give you access to it. We're also not going to allow you to have access to this because we think maybe you're not going to be able to interpret it correctly, and
right,
it'll cause issues, right? And as
right.
we said, if there are tools that allow you to now better utilize and interpret that data, why stand in the way of informing people and giving them the information they need to manage their healthcare better?
Very well said. I apologize, gentlemen, but I have to run. Not for a work reason, but
Understand.
it's holiday party season,
No worries.
and
No, for sure.
have
Let's just wrap up. That I think that's awesome. Appreciate it very much for your time, Alex, for jumping on. I'm just going to call it out again. Your awesome nonprofit that you set up called Open Onco, and I'll include it in our show notes below. Code
thanks, Lester.
openonco.org. And if you have any comments, questions, feel free to like, subscribe, comment down below, and yeah, shoot us a email whenever if you have a question. And of course, this is the first time we did this bold prediction. We're going to check back later on in the year to see how we did. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining, and thanks a lot, Alex and Costas. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Folks.
guys. Great to see you.
Thanks,